Hello and welcome to World War II Part 15. Now this one, as you can see, is a shorter part because we are covering only one topic, before we move to the war in the East, where I'll be doing a full-size video on the preparations and layout for the operations in the East, and then the following part will cover the initial operations prior to Typhoon. So Bismarck, the great German battleship Bismarck. Now the German pocket battleships, had wreaked an amount of havoc, the Graf Spee, of course, at River Plate I'd covered. Another ship, the sister ship of the Graf Spee, the Admiral Scheer, that actually had been operating in South Atlantic, the Scheer had actually provided crews necessary to sail back to France, 3 factory ships, containing people. On February 2nd, the Scheer sailed around Cape of Good Hope and made contact with Atlantis. The 2 German vessels then operated together in Mozambique Channel, sinking a number of ships, including the British tanker Advocate. Now, on March 6th, having sunk or captured 16 ships, totaling nearly 100,000 tons, the Admiral Scheer began her voyage home. Now, she slipped past 2 British cruisers on watch in Denmark Strait, and on April 1st, she docked at Kiel after 160 days at sea. Now, during the cruise, Scheer had covered approximately 55,000 miles, a fantastic achievement, really, in one run. A month and a half earlier, the heavy cruiser Admiral Hipper, commanded by Captain Miesel, had also reached Kiel. She'd sailed from Brest on February 1st, and on 12th, intercepted a convoy from Gibraltar between the Azores and Madeira, and in less than 2 hours sank 7 ships totaling over 30,000 tons with their 8-inch guns. Now, return at 2 warships was facilitated by Operation Berlin. The attacks carried out against British shipping in North Atlantic by the battlecruisers Scharnhorst and Gneisenau. Now, under command of Admiral Gunther Lutyens, the Flotten Chief or Fleet Commander, the Gneisenau and Scharnhorst, had sailed from Kiel on January 23rd and passed through Denmark Strait after a few anxious moments on night of February 3rd. But basically, the mission never really achieved its overall potential, and in attacks on enemy shipping, they never really had to even engage with any British warships. On February 8th, German force was spotted by convoy HX-106, which had sailed from Halifax for Great Britain on January 31st. The convoy was escorted by the old battleship Ramillies. And basically, in accordance with orders, Lutyens broke off contact, despite the fact the captain of Scharnhorst had offered to draw off the escort and give the Gneisenau the opportunity to annihilate the enemy. But they did not engage, The plan was actually not very risky. The Ramillies would have been no match for the 2 German warships, but they were not engaged, Now, a fortnight later off Newfoundland, German squadron sank 3 cargo vessels and 2 tankers of an American-bound convoy that tried to scatter and tried to evade the German ships when they were spotted, but they failed. And then headed southeast, German ships found themselves on March 3rd, less than 300 miles from Tenerife, in the Canary Islands, in a strong position to attack convoys on the Gibraltar run. Now, on morning at 8th of March, a dozen merchant ships came over horizon, escorted, however, by battleship Malaya, which had 15-inch guns, It were a powerfully armed warship. Now, still obeying orders, Lutyens stood off, although he did try to direct the convoy. He did try and direct the convoy to the U-boats operating in the area. He tried to use his warships as a bit of a lure to send the merchant ships in a certain way so the German U-boats, could intercept them. Now, the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, accompanied by their 2 fleet supply ships, moved off northwest again to intercept the Halifax Great Britain route. Now, here, they did manage to avoid the attentions at battleship Nelson and did sink or capture 16 vessels, over a 2-day period, which was success. Now, the hunt began, for these German ships, with the Ermland forcing a large cargo vessel within range of Scharnhorst, whose guns quickly sank her. Now, immediately afterwards, Gneisenau sank an unidentified ship of 5,000 tons at long range, and so the hunt went on. Now, the Scharnhorst, while it was sinking the 4,000-ton ship Silverfish, Uckermark forced 5 ships within range of Gneisenau, which picked them off one by one. Now, time were running out and it were getting too late for attackers to think of making any captures, and about 1500 hours on that day, just when the chase seemed over, 2 battle cruisers increased speed and caught 1 more merchant ship. So basically, the Gneisenau and the Scharnhorst were causing a bit of mayhem, okay? Now, the 2 raiders sunk 22 ships, okay, totaling over 100,000 tons, and it had been quite successful, but really no impact on the Royal Navy whatsoever. Now, after all those events, okay, the repairs to Gneisenau's engines during the course of the fighting took several weeks, and Scharnhorst was actually docked for even longer. So, Operation Rheinübung, okay, which was to have consisted in a raid on British shipping by the Bismarck and the heavy cruiser Prince Eugene, combined with a further sortie by the Gneisenau and the Scharnhorst, okay, could no longer go ahead as planned because those ships were now dry docked. So the Bismarck, okay, would sail on her mission. Now, the Bismarck, okay, the German Hitler and the German naval chiefs like Admiral Raeder were very confident of the Bismarck having a very successful run. Now, it had 8 15-inch guns. You will see the Bismarck's armaments. It is coming on a warship video very soon. And Bismarck were fitted with a radio telemeter, okay, a 90 centimeter wavelength type of radar for calculating range, okay. So basically, the Bismarck could use this telemeter to accurately calculate the range for Bismarck's big guns, okay, which would obviously lead to the destruction of the USS Hood. Now, I won't go through the armaments of the Bismarck. You will see that when we come to it. Now, originally intended to be 35,000 tons, Bismarck, when fully finished and commissioned, displaced actually over 40,000 tons. Big, heavy warship, okay, and so, on August 24th, she was commissioned and she was made ready for a first and a last sortie, okay, after a number of months of training. Now, the Prince Eugene, okay, commanded by Captain Brinkman, were another brand new ship, okay. It displaced just under 14,000 tons. It had 8 8-inch guns, plus a number of other armaments. Now, basically, on April 23rd, okay, the Admiral Hipper struck a mine in the Baltic, and Rheinübung had to be put off until May. So since Scharnhorst and Gneisenau were undergoing repairs, they were unable to carry out the diversions assigned to them. So Bismarck and the flotilla accompanying her had to go it alone without the initial plans for deflecting British naval attentions. Now, Admiral Lutyens, okay, thought he should wait until maybe the 2 battle cruisers Scharnhorst and Gneisenau were ready. He even went so far to suggest that the Tirpitz, Bismarck's sister ship, should be commissioned first before the Bismarck sailed. Now, the objection to that was the surface fleet would thus have been condemned to long weeks of inactivity. They'd have had to leave it 2 or 3 months doing literally nothing, okay, and Admiral Raeder would not allow that. So on evening the 20th of May, okay, after passing through the Kattegat, Bismarck and the Prince Eugene emerged into the North Sea, okay, and began the ultimate chase, okay. Now, early on following morning, okay, news reached London that the 2 German warships had left the Baltic Sea and were headed to the Atlantic. Now, the Admiralty immediately alerted Admiral John Tonvoy, okay, C&C of the Home Fleet, and also informed him that the aircraft carrier Victorious and the battlecruiser Repulse had been put at his disposal. Reconnaissance photographs, okay, taken next day identified the Bismarck and an Admiral Hipper-class heavy cruiser in Kortzfjord, south of Bergen. Now, without dismissing entirely such explanations for Bismarck's move as an invasion of Iceland, Tovey were fairly sure that the real reason was a second German naval sortie into the Atlantic to attack the merchant ships, etc., etc. Now, consequently, he strengthened the patrols along the Orkneys, Shetlands, Faroes, Iceland and Greenland line. And on evening of May 21st, Vice Admiral Holland's battlecruiser squadron, including the battlecruiser Hood, the battleship Prince of Wales and 6 destroyers, set sail from Scapa Flow to Valfjord. Okay, Tovey would thus be assured of a considerable superiority in firepower over his German adversary in total gunnage. But they also didn't factor the Bismarck's radar-guided guns. Now, it is true, okay, the Hood displaced at over 40,000 feet and was 860 feet long, okay, but it was an old ship that had been remodified and done, and built up and maintained. It was the pride of the Royal Navy. Now, on May 22nd, okay, another reconnaissance of Kjosfjord, okay, made in really, really bad weather, showed that the 2 German warships had gone, okay, so at 22:45 on that day, the main fleet sailed from Scapa Flow under Admiral Tovey. Beside the King George V, the sister ship of the Prince of Wales, Tovey also had the aircraft carrier Victorious, 4 cruisers, 7 destroyers. The battlecruiser Repulse, coming from the Clyde, joined him later. Operation Rheinenbung, was underway, and the hunt for the Bismarck was officially on. Now, Lutyens had a choice, to get into Atlantic. He could go through the Denmark Strait and then go between Iceland and Greenland, a route which had been reduced to 60 miles in width by minefields and ice packs, and the 300-mile gap between the Faroes and Iceland. His staff advised him to go for the Faroe option. Now, perhaps the German admiral, had reckoned on bad weather, to hide his movements, but he had not took into account British radar. Now, on 23rd of May 1922, the cruiser Suffolk spotted the Bismarck and her companion. Now she dodged into a patch of mist to prevent Bismarck from firing on her, and sent out a report at German ship's position while shadowing them by radar. Now, an hour later, the Suffolk were joined by his sister ship Norfolk, which made the first enemy ship movements reported to Admiral Tovey, and the 2 cruisers then shadowed the German squadron by radar. Now, at 5:35 in the following morning, using information provided by the Suffolk and the Norfolk, the battlecruiser squadron sighted Bismarck and Prince Eugene off the starboard bow in an excellent position, in which they could be fired on by all the British ship's turrets. And yet, a few minutes later, Vice Admiral Holland altered course, with the result that the rear turrets at ships could no longer bear. So they emerged in a perfect position to attack the Bismarck, but sadly they did not take advantage of that, and many of their guns from the new position they went into would not have been able to open fire. Now, at all events, at 5:52, Admiral Holland gave order to fire on the German ships, concentrating on the leading German ship. Now, during the night, Prince Eugene and Bismarck had changed places, so the Bismarck was no longer on the leading position. It had now moved to a more rear position, with the result that the fire of the hood were now directed against the former. Bismarck was correctly identified by Prince of Wales, which thus fired on the second ship, but this meant that the anticipated superiority in guns had now become an inferiority, and also taking into account the Bismarck's radar-guided guns. It was not a good place to be in. Now, the crisis at Battle Squadron, at 1600, now just as British squadron began to turn to port in order to bring the rear turrets also to bear, and we were about to open fire on Bismarck, a 15-inch salvo landed on British battlecruiser. Lieutenant Commander Jaspers, Prince Eugene's gunnery officer, describes the scene, and he said, as a whole salvo of 15-inch shells from the German flagship reached its target, there was an explosion of quite incredible violence between the second funnel and the mainmast. The salvo seems to crush everything under it with irresistible force, and through huge holes opened up in the grey hull, enormous flames leapt up from depths at ship, far above the funnels, and blazed for several seconds through an ash-coloured pall of smoke, which spread terrifyingly towards the ship bows. As this grey mass, fringed with red, composed of smoke, fire and steam, was seen to form 2 billowing columns spreading upward and outwards, while just below them formed a kind of incandescent dome, whose initial low flat curve rose higher and higher, finally culminating in an explosion of burning debris. The aft magazine blew, shooting up into air, a molten mass of colour of red lead, which then lazily fell back into the sea. Basically, the hood was struck with phenomenal force by the Bismarck. Now, having disposed of the hood, Bismarck and Prince Eugene turned attention on the Prince of Wales, which had not yet been fired on. The initial salvos were on the hood, and in space of only minutes, German ships had landed 4 main 15-inch shells on British battleship. One shell, hit the compass platform, killing or wounding everyone on it except the ship's captain, Captain Leach, and a signaller. Prince of Wales' plight, were increased by the fact that the breakdown followed breakdown in the turrets as well, and Captain Leach had to break off the engagement under a smokescreen at 6:13. Now, they had only fired 93 15-inch shells, which is less than 10% of her stock, but Bismarck had achieved a brilliant success in sinking the hood. Now, basically, more important, one of British shells had hit a fuel bunker, causing it to leak. Now, this contaminated the fuel with seawater, seriously affecting Bismarck's performance, and also caused an enormous ribbon of fuel to trail out behind her. And at 8:01, therefore, Admiral Lutyens informed his superiors that he intended to make for Saint Nazaire. Now, Prince Eugene had escaped from clash unscathed, despite several near misses, and later carried out her original orders in the Atlantic. Now, Admiral Lutyens' decision was discussed at the Berghof by Hitler and Grand Admiral radar on June 6th, the Führer were puzzled. First, why had Lutyens not returned to a German port after engagement with Hood, which were a great kind of PR success. And secondly, why had he not pressed home the attack on the Prince of Wales and destroyed her, even if the latter had led to loss at Bismarck? Okay, net result would have been the destruction of 2 British capital ships for 1 German, but I don't think Admiral Radar to the Bismarck, the pride of the German Navy, would have been happy to just accept it, being lost for the sinking of 2 British warships, considering the comparable strength of the Royal Navy. So basically, okay, as we are here, so the Admiralty is stunned, okay, so Dudley Pound and his Deputy Vice Admiral Sir Tom Phillips and embarked on a whole series of measures, okay, designed to remedy the situation and restore the prestige at Royal Navy following the sinking of the Hood. But to quote one example, they had set on the Bismarck's 2 battleships, 1 battlecruiser, 1 aircraft carrier, 3 cruisers and 9 destroyers, okay, not hesitating to rob Atlantic convoys of their escorts in the process. The British put an enormous amount of ships out now to hunt for the Bismarck. Now on the east coast of Greenland, okay, Wake Walker had taken under his command the Prince of Wales and the destroyers at Battlecruiser Squadron and continued to shadow Bismarck by radar. Now, since Lutyens was steering southwest, Torvey closed in on an interception course that would allow him to engage the 2 German ships at some time the following morning, even if they tried to return into North Sea by passing south of Iceland or to put into a French port because of the oil leak, rather than pursue their original plan of hunting down Atlantic merchant ships. Now, to slow down his opponent, okay, Tovey decided to send in the Swordfish from the aircraft carrier Victorious. Now, both Victorious and her air crews were untried as the Prince of Wales, and more important, weather had turned foul. And despite the weather, okay, Lieutenant Commander Esmond led his Swordfish on an attack on the Bismarck. He himself landed a hit on the German battlecruiser's armour belt. Unfortunately for British, this torpedo it did little but damage the paintwork, and in the depth at night, all the attacking aircraft managed to relocate Victorious and land safely. Now, meanwhile, events had been moving swiftly. First of all, Lutyens ordered Prince Eugene to leave Bismarck and operate independently, and then, much to Tovey's consternation, Suffolk lost contact with Bismarck. Now, matters were not improved by the fact that a long radio message sent by Lutyens at 0400 on May 25th was intercepted by the British, but its bearing was incorrectly plotted and led Tovey to the belief that the Germans were attempting to move back into North Sea. Another problem for the British Navy was the fact that hardly an hour had passed without anyone at Royal Navy's vessels having to withdraw to refuel, some to Iceland, some to Newfoundland and some to Gibraltar. In fact, at 15 units which had sailed on May 22nd, King George V was the only one left in the central Atlantic. So basically, okay, it was now 10:30 hours, and though Admiral Tovey, as a result of plotting error of the night before, was not in a position to intercept, Sir John Somerville, commander of Force H, was able to send in a strike of Swordfish torpedo bombers from Ark Royal. If they could only succeed, okay, in slowing the Bismarck down before midnight, the battle would be won. Otherwise, King George V and Rodney would be forced to turn back for lack of fuel. So they were now up against a clock. They had to slow the Bismarck down so the heavy British warships could intercept before they ran out of fuel. Now, at first strike were launched in equally showers at 1450, okay, but were a total failure. Swordfish mistakenly attacked the cruiser Sheffield, which Admiral Somerville had sent on ahead to keep tabs on the Bismarck, so they hit one of the British ships by mistake. Now, fortunately for Sheffield, the attack achieved nothing more than another demonstration of British torpedoes unofficially, thankfully for the crew and commanders of the Sheffield, otherwise they would have been sunk. Now, the fleet air arm saw their weapons fitted with magnetic detonators explode as soon as they touched the water, okay, which means they did not hit the cruiser Sheffield. That second strike flew off at 1910 hours, armed with torpedoes fitted with contact pistols and set to run at a shallower depth, and 15 aircraft took off. They were observed by Lieutenant Commander Wolfart of U-556. He basically quoted in his log, okay, 1908 hours alert, a battleship of the King George 5th class and an aircraft carrier, probably Ark Royal, are coming up astern, travelling at great speed. Deflection 10 degrees right. If only I had torpedoes, I'm in perfect position to attack. No need even to manoeuvre, no destroyers, no zigzags. I could slip between them and fire on both simultaneously. Torpedo planes are taking off from the aircraft carrier. Perhaps I could have helped Bismarck. Now, apart from error of identifying renown for the King George V class, okay, there is no reason to doubt the validity of Woolhart's narrative. And imagine if he would have had torpedoes and could have attacked those two British aircraft carriers. Now, during a hail of fire, okay, from all Bismarck's guns, the Swordfish strike went in to successfully, between 24-7 hours and 21-25 hours, scored 2 hits on the Bismarck. The first torpedo struck Bismarck's armour belt and caused no damage, but the second hit half, damaging her propellers, wrecking her steering gear and jamming her rudders. Now, after desperate but unsuccessful attempts to free them, Lutjens sent the following message: no longer able to steer ship, will fight to last shell, long live the Führer. Now, after describing, okay, 2 complete circles, the luckless Bismarck headed slowly north-northwest, straight towards King George V and Rodney. But before she met these 2 battleships, she ran into 5 destroyers, okay, led by Captain Vian, which had taken off convoy duty to act as anti-submarine screen for Sir John Tovey's main fleet. Now, seeing Bismarck's speed reduced dramatically, okay, Vian decided to attack. Now, so heavy was the sea running and so accurate Bismarck's fire that of the 16 torpedoes fired by the 1 Polish and 4 British ships, only 2 of them struck home. Now, the following morning, King George V and Rodney, guided by Norfolk, arrived on the scene. The 2 battleships opened fire on Bismarck, which was moving at 7 knots at 8:47 and 8:48 respectively, and after an initial attack, okay, from 25,000 yards but soon closing to 16,000 yards, the 2 British battleships, King George V and Rodney, blasted Bismarck, okay, with a 10 14-inch guns and 9 16-inch guns until 10:15, when Tovey broke off the engagement to head back north to refuel. Now, by this time, Bismarck were a battered hulk, okay, ablaze from stem to stern with all her guns silenced, but her flag still flying proudly. Russell Grenfell had described the Germans' battleship's end in vivid terms. So he said, Russell Grenfell actually said, by 10 a.m. the Bismarck was a silent, battered wreck. Her mast was down, her funnel had disappeared, her guns were pointing in all directions, and a cloud of black smoke was rising from the middle of the ship and blowing away in the wind. Instead, she was clearly a blazing inferno, for the bright glow of internal fires could be seen shining through numerous shell and splinter holes in her sides. Her men were deserting their guns, and parties of them could be seen running to and fro on the upper deck as shells continued to rain in, and occasionally jumping over the side to escape by a watery death from the terror on board. Captain Patterson would have ceased fire earlier had he known this, but the Bismarck's port side was so screened by a wall of shell splashes along her whole length that it was none too easy to notice what was actually happening on board. So basically, okay, the conclusion of Sir John Tovey's report, okay, must actually state, Bismarck fought an extremely courageous battle against greatly superior forces. In best tradition of the Imperial German Navy, she went down with her colours flying. Now, the Dorsetshire, okay, and the destroyer Maori picked up 110 survivors from the Bismarck. U-74, a German U-boat, picked up 3 more who were clinging onto a raft, and the German supply ship Sachsenwald, okay, picked up 2 more survivors. Now, upon hearing, okay, of the result of the final battle of the Bismarck, okay, Captain Franco sent the Spanish cruiser Canarias to area, but no further survivors were found. It would have been interesting had the German aircraft carrier Graf Zeppelin, if the German aircraft carrier Graf Zeppelin had have been finished in time, because Admiral Raeder's initial plan, if the Graf Zeppelin was ready, she would accompany Bismarck to provide fighter support, because the Graf Zeppelin would have carried a complement of Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters, which would have made absolute mincemeat, of the British torpedo bombers, which were slow and lacked manoeuvrability. Could be effective against ships, but the Messerschmitt Bf 109s would have torn them to pieces in air and provided accurate air cover. And also, if the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau would have been in the area and not dry docked, would that also have helped Bismarck by diverting more of the British ships initially from the area? So these are all questions that will continue to go on, okay, for the Bismarck. Now, one thing, okay, on this shorter World War II Part 15 is that concludes the last major event. Before I now turn heavy attention, okay, to the war in the East, the preparations for Operation Barbarossa, the beginning of the Great Patriotic War, and the violent and huge campaign Hitler launches on June 22nd to destroy Soviet Russia. On my last video, I got to June 21st. I'll now do a special video looking at the planning and the size of armies on both sides, before part 17 we go full scale into Hitler's great operation, Operation Barbarossa, what I still call the greatest invasion in history. Over 8 million men, over 10,000 tanks involved, just enormous numbers. So I will cover the build-up and preparation and layout of forces, and then we go into the invasion of Russia in part 17. So there is my latest video, World War II part 15, a shorter one, part 16, and more aircraft, tanks and warships coming very soon. I'm out for now.